They say the devil is in the details, but that's a lie people tell themselves because they're too lazy to read the fine print. The devil isn't in the details. The devil is in the definitions section, usually around page 4, paragraph 3, subsection B. That's where I lived for 16 years. While the sales guys were out buying steak dinners on the company card, and the marketing team was busy sniffing their own farts in brainstorming sessions about synergy, I was in the back room building the engine. I'm Helen, I'm a corporate licensing architect. It sounds boring, I know. It sounds like the kind of job where you wear beige cardigans and die quietly at your desk. But in the world of data streaming, I'm the person who makes sure the billion-dollar pipes don't burst. I drafted the code, not the computer code, but the legal code, the DNA of the company. 16 years ago, this company, Streamline, wasn't a tech giant in a glass tower in Wilmington. It was three guys and me, crammed into a rented office above a tire shop that smelled permanently of burnt rubber and desperation. I remember sitting on a folding chair, balancing a laptop on my knees, drafting the original exclusivity agreements while the founder, Old Man Harris, paced around smoking cheap cigars. He was a bastard, but he was a smart bastard, knew that the tech didn't matter if the rights weren't locked down. Helen, he'd say, pointing a callous finger at me, make it bulletproof. I want a contract so tight that if they try to breathe without paying us, they owe us for the oxygen. So I did. I built a fortress of paper. I wove clauses together like a spiderweb made of razor wire. I created the licensing infrastructure that eventually turned that tire shop startup into a $1.2 billion empire. For 16 years, I stayed in the shadows. I didn't want the fame. I didn't need the magazine covers. I just wanted the machine to work. Quick side note before I get into how the machine tried to eat me. I'm dumping this whole saga here because my lawyer said I can't talk to the press yet, but he didn't say anything about anonymous forums. If you want to see how a middle-aged woman takes down a boardroom full of frat boys, hit subscribe and maybe upvote, because the tea I'm about to spill is scorching hot and frankly, it helps the algorithm know I'm not a bot. Okay, back to the grime. The problem with building a perfect machine is that eventually people forget it needs a mechanic. They just assume it runs on magic. Old Man Harris died last year. Heart attack. Probably the first time his heart did anything spontaneous in 80 years. And just like that, the kingdom passed to the prince. Enter Brent. Brent Harris, 32 years old. MBA from a school his daddy paid a library wing for. Teeth whitened to a shade that doesn't exist in nature. He walked into the CEO's office on day one, wearing a suit that cost more than my first Honda, carrying a latte and a sense of entitlement so dense it had its own gravitational pull. I knew we were in trouble the moment he called his first all-hands meeting. He didn't talk about stability, didn't talk about our core licensing revenue. He talked about disruption. He used the word pivot 6 times in 3 minutes. He looked at the company his father built, the company I secured, and saw it as an ATM for his ego. He looked at me, the woman in the corner with the sensible glasses and the 3-ring binders, and he didn't see the architect. He saw furniture. He saw a legacy cost. He saw a boomer relic, I'm 45, you illiterate turnip. That's Gen X, but whatever. I remember a meeting about 3 months into his reign. I was trying to explain the volatility of our Asia-Pacific sublicensing agreements. It's a delicate ecosystem. You pull one thread, the whole sweater unravels. Helen, Brent interrupted, spinning a fidget spinner, yes, a literal fidget spinner in 2024 on the mahogany table. You're getting bogged down in the how. I need you to focus on the wow. We need to be agile. You need to break things. I lowered my reading glasses. Brent, if we break the sublicensing terms in Singapore, we trigger a default clause in the German master agreement. We lose the European market overnight. He rolled his eyes. Actually rolled them, like a teenager asked to take out the trash. That's just legal mumbo-jumbo, Helen. We have lawyers for that. I need visionaries, not librarians. The room went quiet. The other executives, men I'd worked with for a decade, men whose asses I'd saved from a dozen lawsuits, stared at their notebooks. No one said a word. No one defended the woman who built the floor they were standing on. That was the moment. That was the shotgun blast. I didn't say anything. I just closed my binder. The sound of the metal ring snapping shut echoed like a gunshot in that silent room. Understood, I said. My voice was calm. It's always calm. My rage doesn't scream, it calculates. I'll stop being a librarian. Brent smirked, thinking he'd won a power struggle. He thought he was housebreaking the old staff. He had no idea he had just walked into the reactor core and turned off the cooling system. See, Brent made the classic mistake of the inherited rich. He confused authority with power. He had the title. He had the corner office. He had the signatory pen, but he didn't know where the bodies were buried. Hell, he didn't even know there was a graveyard. I went back to my office, a small, windowless box compared to the glass fishbowls the new VP hires got, and I started to organize. I didn't organize for efficiency. I organized for war. I pulled up the original founding documents, the ones with the coffee stains, the ones typed on software that doesn't exist anymore. I sat there, surrounded by the hum of the servers. I authorized the budget for 10 years ago, and I waited. I knew it was coming. And like Brent are predictable. They're like bad code, they always crash the same way. He needed to cut costs to fund his visionary new projects, which mostly involved blockchain because of course they did. And the easiest cost to cut is the quiet department that never makes a fuss. He was going to fire me. I could feel it in the air conditioning. It smelled like cheap cologne and betrayal. But here's the thing about architects, we keep the blueprints. And sometimes, if we're smart, we draw trapdoors that only we can see. I looked at the framed photo of Old Man Harris on my desk. He looked miserable in the picture, clutching a cigar. Sorry, old man, I whispered to the photo. Your kid is about to learn why you never fire the person who holds the keys to the castle. I saved 3 specific files to an encrypted USB drive. I put the drive in my purse next to my lip balm. Then I waited for the phone to ring. It didn't take long. The call came on a Tuesday morning. Tuesday is the coward's day for firing people. Monday is too aggressive. Friday risks a weekend PR disaster. Tuesday is bland. Tuesday is safe. Helen, could you pop down to the strategy room? Just a quick sync. It was the HR director, a woman named Kayla who looked like she was 12 years old and exclusively shopped at Zara. Her voice had that tremble in it. I'm about to ruin your life, but I'm going to use therapy speak while I do it tremble. On my way, I said, I picked up my coffee mug. I took a sip. It was cold. I left it there. I grabbed nothing else. No notebook, no pen, just me and my suit. I walked down the hallway I had walked down 5,000 times. I passed the server room. I passed the wall of patents, 7 of which had my name in the fine print as a contributor. I passed the break room where the new marketing interns were making TikToks about hustle culture. They looked at me like I was a ghost. Maybe I was. I walked into the strategy room. It was a glass box in the center of the floor, designed for transparency. The blinds were drawn, so much for transparency. Kayla was there, sitting at the head of the table, clutching a manila folder like a shield. Brent was leaning against the window, looking out at the parking lot, bored. Didn't even turn around when I walked in. He was checking his watch. A Rolex Daytona, tacky. Have a seat, Helen, Kayla said. She didn't offer me water. That's the first sign. If they offer water, they feel guilty. If they don't, they just want you gone. I sat. I folded my hands on the table. Am I being fired, Kayla? Kayla blinked. She wasn't ready for the direct approach. She wanted to do the dance. We're going through a strategic realignment, Helen. Brent and the board have been reviewing our operational efficiency. Restructuring, I said flatly. Just say the word, it has fewer syllables. Brent turned around then. He had that smirk, the one that says he thinks he's the smartest person in the room because his dad owned the building. Look, Helen, let's not make this a drama. The industry is shifting. We need cloud-native thinkers. You've done adequate work here for the era, but we're pivoting to a lean agile model. We need speed. And frankly, your department is a bottleneck. A bottleneck, I repeated. You mean compliance? I mean dead weight, Brent said, dropping the corporate speak for a second. You review contracts like we're buying real estate in 1990. It's slow, it's boring, and it's expensive. We're automating the licensing framework. AI can do what you do in seconds. I almost laughed. I physically had to bite the inside of my cheek to stop a cackle from escaping. AI. Doing my job? Good luck getting ChatGPT to understand the nuance of a cross-border indemnity clause regarding third-party intellectual property in a non-extradition treaty zone. So I'm redundant, I said. Your role has been eliminated, Kayla corrected quickly, sliding a thick packet across the table. Effective immediately. We've prepared a severance package. 2 weeks of pay for every year of service, capped at 6 months. We're also offering out placement services to help you update your resume. I looked at the packet. 6 months of pay for 16 years of building the empire. It was an insult. It was a slap in the face with a wet glove, but I didn't reach for it, not yet, and my equity, I asked. My vesting schedule? Brent waved a hand dismissively. Standard terms apply. Anything unvested is forfeited. You know the drill. You wrote half the policy, didn't you? He thought that was a burn. He thought he was using my own work against me. I did, I said. I wrote the policy for employees. I didn't write the policy for founders' partners. Brent frowned. What? Nothing, I said, standing up. I'll sign the separation agreement, but I need one thing first. We can't give you access to your computer, Kayla said, panicking slightly. Security protocol. I don't need the computer. I need a hard copy of my original employment contract, one signed by your father in 2008. And a printout of my current personnel record showing my termination date and cause. Why? Brent asked, eyes narrowing. For my unemployment filing, I lied smoothly. The state requires proof of the original hire date for long-term benefits calculations. It was nonsense. Complete bureaucratic gibberish. But people like Brent and Kayla are terrified of bureaucracy. They don't understand it, so they obey it. Fine. Brent sighed. Kayla, print it. Let's get this over with. I have a lunch meeting at Nabu. Kayla scurried out of the room. Brent and I were left alone. The air was thick with unsaid things. You think I'm making a mistake, Brent said, challenging me. He wanted a fight. He wanted me to scream so he could feel justified in calling me emotional. I think you're doing exactly what I expected you to do, I said. You're pruning the tree because you think the leaves are messy, without realizing the roots are the only thing holding it up. We'll be fine, he scoffed. The revenue is on autopilot, is it? I asked softly. Kayla returned, breathless, handing me a thin stack of papers. my original 2008 contract, and the termination notice signed by Brent dated today. Thank you, I said. I placed the papers into my folder. I didn't sign their separation agreement. You need to sign the waiver, Kayla said, pushing a pen toward me. I'll take it home to review, I said, standard procedure. You gave me 48 hours in the document itself. Clause 12. I wrote it, remember? Kayla looked at Brent. Brent shrugged. Whatever, let her take it. She's got no leverage. What's she gonna do, sue us for being boring? I stood up. I smoothed my skirt. I looked Brent in the eye. Goodbye, Brent. Good luck with the pivot. Yeah. Bye, Helen. I walked out. I didn't pack a box. Didn't say goodbye to the receptionist. I walked straight to the elevator, rode it down to the lobby, and walked out into the Delaware sunshine. My heart was pounding, but not from fear. It was pounding from adrenaline. Because as I clutched that folder to my chest, I knew something they didn't. I knew that in 2008, Old Man Harris had been drunk when he signed my original employment offer. And because he was drunk and paranoid, he had insisted on a very specific, very non-standard clause regarding involuntary termination without cause. A clause he thought would never trigger because he never planned to fire me. A clause that Brent had just triggered, and worse for them, much worse, was what I had buried in the master licensing agreement itself. The one Brent just said was on autopilot. He had no idea. He had just kicked the pilot out of the plane at 30,000 feet. He was sitting in the cockpit pulling on a joystick that wasn't connected to anything. I got into my car, a sensible Volvo, and I finally let myself smile. It wasn't a nice smile. It was the smile of a predator who just watched the prey walk into the cage and lock the door from the inside. Alexa, I said to the empty car, play Sympathy for the Devil. My house in the suburbs is quiet. It's a specialized kind of quiet, engineered, insulated, triple-paned. I like it that way. No kids, no husband anymore. Todd left 6 years ago for spin instructor named Candy with a K, and honestly I should have sent her a thank you note. Just me and the hum of my Sub-Zero wine fridge. I kicked off my heels by the door. I didn't change out of my suit. I needed the armor. I poured a glass of Sansera, crisp, acidic, sharp, and carried it to my dining room table. This was my war room. I placed the papers Kayla had given me on the table. Then I went to the wall safe behind a generic abstract painting in the hallway. I spun the dial. Click, click, click. Heavy steel swung open. Inside weren't jewels or cash, just backup hard drives and a heavy, fireproof document box. I brought the box to the table. This was the in case of emergency kit, or as I like to call it, the dead man's switch. I opened the box. The smell of old paper drifted out. I pulled out the original master license agreement, MLA, from 2008. The paper was heavy, bond stock. Here's the thing about contracts that Brent and his MBA buddies don't understand. A contract is a living organism. It evolves. You add amendments, you add addendums, you add schedules. Over 16 years, the Streamline MLA had grown from a 20-page document to a 400-page behemoth. Every time we entered a new country, every time we added a new data tier, we slapped a patch on the code. But the foundation, the original 2008 agreement, was the bedrock. If the bedrock cracks, the skyscraper falls. I opened the file I'd stolen from the office, the digital backup I'd saved on the USB drive. I pulled up the 2018 Global Expansion Amendment. This was the document that allowed Streamline to sell its tech to third-party vendors in Asia and Europe. It was the cash cow. It accounted for 70% of the company's current revenue. I compared the digital signature on the 2018 amendment with the signature requirements in the 2008 master agreement. And there it was, the ghost in the machine. In 2008, Old Man Harris was paranoid about being ousted by a board coup. So I wrote in a clause, Clause 14, B, the sovereignty clause. It stated that any amendment effectively altering the core IP exclusivity of the company must be countersigned by the founding licensor, Harris, and the chief licensing architect, me in wet ink. Not digital, wet ink. It was an archaic clause we put in to stop hostile takeovers. We joked about it, we called it the blood oath. When the 2018 expansion happened, Harris was already sick. He was checking out. He signed the amendment digitally from a yacht in the Mediterranean. I signed it digitally from my desk in Wilmington. Everyone was in a rush. The lawyers said digital is fine, it's industry standard. And I had let it slide. I knew it technically violated Clause 14B, but we were all on the same team, right? The company was making money. I was getting my bonus. Who cares about wet ink? But here's the kicker. The 2008 master agreement stated that any amendment violating the signature protocol is void ab initio. Meaning, it doesn't just stop working today. It means it never legally existed. If the 2018 amendment is void, then Streamline doesn't have the right to license its tech to anyone outside of the US, which meant every single dollar they had collected from international partners for the last 6 years, hundreds of millions of dollars, was collected illegally. It was essentially fraud, or at best, breach of contract on a planetary scale. I took a sip of wine. It tasted like victory. Brent didn't just fire an employee. He fired the only person whose silence was validating a billion-dollar legal error. By firing me without cause, he severed the implied covenant of good faith that kept me from pointing this out. I looked at the termination letter Brent had signed. Role eliminated due to redundancy. Redundancy, I whispered, tracing the word with my finger. You idiot. I started to sort the papers into 3 piles. I went to my home office closet and found 3 pristine navy blue folders. Folder 1, The Truth, contains the 2008 Master Agreement with the wet ink clause highlighted. The 2018 amendment showing only digital signatures. Legal brief I just started drafting in my head explaining why the 2018 document is toilet paper. Folder 2, The Crime, contains a printout of Brent's strategic roadmap where he details the new expansion plans that rely entirely on the 2018 amendment being valid, proof that they are continuing to sell rights they don't have. Folder 3, The Price. This was the fun one. I pulled out my original employment contract, one old man Harris signed when he was drunk. Clause 9, Intellectual Property Retention. In the event of involuntary termination without cause, the employee, Helen, retains a 1% royalty interest in all licensing structures she personally authored, retroactive to the date of deployment, vesting immediately upon termination. I had written it as a joke. A golden parachute for a startup that had no money. 1% of nothing is nothing. 1% of $1.2 billion. That's not nothing. That's by a private island and name it Brent is a moron money. The math was staggering. They owed me back pay on every license sold since 2008, plus the royalty going forward. I sat back. The house was dark now. The only light came from my laptop screen. I wasn't going to sue them yet. That's what a normal person would do. A normal person would call a lawyer and file a complaint. No, I was an architect. I was going to let them build the tower a little higher. I was going to let Brent climb all the way to the top, scream his victory to the world, and then I was going to pull the pin. I needed them to commit one more act. I needed them to publicly rely on the invalid contract one more time with Brent's name on it. I checked my phone. A notification from LinkedIn. Brent Harris posted, "Big things coming next week. Global expansion like you've never seen. #disruption #new era." I smiled. He was doing the work for me. "Proceed, Brent," I said to the glowing screen. "Disrupt yourself. 2 weeks. That's how long I waited. For 14 days I was a ghost. I didn't update my LinkedIn. I didn't answer calls from confused ex-colleagues asking why my email bounced. I woke up at 6 a.m. Did yoga, because flexibility is important when you're about to bend a corporation over a barrel. And then I sat at my dining table and monitored the wires. I had Google Alerts set up for Streamline, Brent Harris, and Eurotech Solutions. Eurotech was the big fish. They were a German conglomerate looking to license our entire streaming backend for the EU market. It was the deal Brent had been chasing to prove to the shareholders that he wasn't just a nepotism hire. It was a $200 million contract, and it was completely illegal. On a Thursday, the press release dropped. I saw it on TechCrunch first. Streamline partners with Eurotech in historic $200 licensing deal. CEO Brent Harris calls it the dawn of a borderless data future. I pulled up the article. There was a photo of Brent shaking hands with the Eurotech CEO in Berlin. Brent was beaming. He looked like he'd just invented the internet. The article was full of quotes about synergy and robust legal frameworks. I almost felt bad for the Eurotech lawyers. German lawyers are thorough. They don't like surprises. They like rules. They assume that when a US company says we own the rights, they actually own the rights. They assume due diligence was done. Assumed Brent knew how to read. I zoomed in on the photo. In the background on a screen was a schematic of the data architecture. My architecture, the one governed by the 2008 Master Agreement. Gotcha, I whispered. I didn't call Brent. Calling Brent would give him a chance to spin it. He'd try to bury it, maybe try to bribe me with a consulting fee. No, I needed to cut off his air supply. I opened my laptop and composed an email. I didn't send it to Streamline. I sent it to the General Counsel of Eurotech Solutions, a man named Klaus. I'd met him once at a conference in Geneva. He was a serious man who wore 3-piece suits and had zero sense of humor. Subject, inquiry regarding Clause 14, B/Streamline Licensing Authority. Dear Klaus, I hope this note finds you well. I am writing to you as the original author of the Streamline Master License Agreement, 2008. I noticed the exciting news about your partnership. As I am no longer with Streamline, effective 2 weeks ago, I am organizing my personal records. I wanted to bring a small administrative detail to your attention to ensure your compliance team is fully covered. Do you please verify if the 2018 Global Amendment, attached to your license agreement, contains the wet ink countersignatures required under Clause 14? B of the founding document? My records indicate that without these specific signatures, the amendment is technically void ab initio, which would unfortunately render any sublicensing of the IP to Eurotech unauthorized under U.S. law. I'm sure it's just a paperwork oversight on Streamline's end. Given the strict liability laws in the EU regarding IP theft, I thought a friend should let you know. Best regards, Helen. I hit send. It was the most passive-aggressive paragraph I had ever written. It was beautiful. It wasn't a threat. It was a friendly heads-up. It framed the massive fraud as a paperwork oversight. I poured a fresh cup of coffee and watched the clock. It was 2 p.m. in Delaware. That meant it was 8 p.m. in Germany. Klaus was probably at dinner. He'd check his email on his phone. He'd read it. He'd frown. He'd call his junior associates. They would pull the contract. They would look at clause 14b. They would look at the signatures. Then the screaming would start. I gave it 3 hours. At 5:15 p.m., my phone rang. It wasn't Klaus. It was a number I recognized. The direct line to the Streamline General Counsel's office. I let it go to voicemail. 2 minutes later, it rang again. Brent's cell number. I let it go to voicemail. 5 minutes later, a text from Brent. Helen, pick up the phone. What the F did you send to Germany? We need to talk now. I took a screenshot of the text. I added it to folder 2, then I replied, I'm sorry, who is this? I don't have this number saved. My employment ended 2 weeks ago. The dots bubbled instantly. He was typing furiously. Stop playing games. Klaus just put a hold on the wire transfer. He's talking about fraudulent inducement. You need to fix this. Call them back and tell them you were mistaken. I smiled. I could hear his panic through the LTE network. The $200 million wire transfer was frozen. The stock price was going to take a hit the moment rumors started flying. I typed back slowly. I can't speak on behalf of the company, Brent. I'm not an employee. I'm just a confused bystander. If you need my professional opinion on the contracts, I'm available for consultation. My rate is considerably higher than my salary was. He didn't text back immediately. He was probably throwing his phone across the room. 10 minutes later, an email arrived, official company letterhead. From the general counsel, Marcus. Marcus was a decent guy, but weak. He did what Brent told him. Subject, urgent. Legal consultation and settlement discussion, dear Helen. I would like to invite you to the office tomorrow morning at 9 a.m. to discuss the recent communications regarding the Euro tech deal. We believe there has been a misunderstanding regarding the validity of the 2018 amendment. We are prepared to discuss a retroactive consulting arrangement to clarify these terms. Please confirm your attendance. Marcus, clarify these terms. That was lawyer speak for please come save our asses before we go to prison. I didn't reply immediately. I went to my closet. I pushed aside the sweatpants and the yoga gear. I reached into the back and pulled out the suit. It was a vintage Armani, charcoal gray, sharp enough to cut glass. I hadn't worn it in 5 years because it was too intimidating for the casual office culture Brent tried to instill. Tomorrow, I said to the suit, we're going to be intimidating. I replied to Marcus with one word, confirmed. The trap was sprung. Now I just had to walk in and close the jaws. That night, I slept like a baby. The kind of deep, restorative sleep you only get when you know you hold the winning lottery ticket and everyone else is holding a losing betting slip. While I slept, I knew what was happening inside Streamline HQ. I still had friends there, low-level analysts, paralegals, the invisible people Brent ignored. My phone buzzed silently through the night with encrypted messages on Signal. Dude, why is the general counsel screaming at the IT director at 10 p.m.? They're scrubbing the servers, searching for wet ink documents. Brent is in the boardroom. He looks like he's gonna puke. Did you do something? Lol, I didn't reply. Plausible deniability is a beautiful thing. I woke up at 6:30 a.m. I showered. I did my hair, tight bun, severe, no loose strands. I put on the Armani suit. It fit perfectly. It felt like chainmail. Applied my makeup, not too much, just enough to look alive, awake, and dangerous. I drank my coffee black. I gathered the 3 folders. They sat on my kitchen counter, innocent-looking navy blue cardstock. Folder 1, the law. Folder 2, the evidence. Folder 3, the bill. I put them in my leather briefcase, the one old man Harris had given me for my 10th anniversary. It was battered, scratched leather. It looked like it had seen battles. It had. I drove to the office. The commute was surreal. I listened to NPR. They were talking about the weather, sunny with a high of 75. They didn't mention that a local tech giant was imploding. Not yet. I pulled into the parking lot. My badge had been deactivated, obviously. I couldn't get into the executive garage. I had to park in the visitor lot half a mile away. Petty, I muttered, locking the Volvo. I walked across the asphalt. The sun was hitting the glass facade of the building. It looked impressive. From the outside, it looked like a fortress of innovation. From the inside, I knew it was a house of cards held together by a signature that didn't exist. I walked into the lobby. The receptionist, a sweet girl named Sarah, looked up. Her eyes went wide. She knew I'd been fired. The rumor mill moves faster than fiber optics. Helen, she stammered. I thought. I have a meeting with Marcus and Brent, I said, smiling warmly. It wasn't her fault. Can you buzz me in? I have to call up, she said, reaching for the phone nervously. Go ahead. She whispered into the receiver. She nodded. She turned pale. They said to send you straight up to the war room. The war room? I raised an eyebrow. They used to call it the Synergy Suite. The fact that they reverted to war room meant the panic was terminal. Thanks, Sarah. I walked to the elevators. I pressed the button for the 12th floor. The doors slid open. I stepped in. Checked my reflection in the mirrored walls. I looked calm. I looked like a woman who was about to audit God. The elevator dinged. The doors opened. The hallway was quiet, too quiet. Usually this floor was buzzing with assistants and junior VPs trying to look busy. Today, ghost town, they had cleared the floor, they didn't want witnesses. I walked down the long corridor, my heels clicking on the polished concrete. Click, 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 the sound of a clock counting down. I reached the double glass doors of the boardroom. Through the glass, I could see them. Brent was pacing. His suit jacket was off, his tie was loosened, he looked sweaty. Marcus, the general counsel, was sitting at the table, his head in his hands, surrounded by stacks of paper. Two external lawyers, hired guns, probably charging $1,000 an hour, were whispering to each other, looking at laptops. They looked up as I approached. I didn't knock. I just pushed the door open. It was heavy, but I didn't struggle. "Good morning, gentlemen," I said. My voice didn't shake, it filled the room. Brent stopped pacing. He turned to me. His eyes were red-rimmed. "You," he spat, "you have some nerve showing up here after trying to sabotage a $200 million deal." "I was invited," I said, walking to the head of the table, opposite Marcus, ignoring Brent. I placed my briefcase on the table, and I didn't sabotage anything. I simply answered a question from a colleague in Germany. "Transparency is one of your core values, isn't it, Brent?" "Transparency?" Brent yelled. "You maliciously misled our partner, did I?" I looked at Marcus. "Marcus, tell him." Marcus looked up. He looked aged. He looked like he hadn't slept in a week. "She's right, Brent, technically." "Technically?" Brent slammed his hand on the table. "I don't care about technically. I care about the money frozen in the bank." "Sit down, Brent." I said. I didn't shout. I used the voice I used when he was an intern, and I had to explain how a printer worked. It worked. He was so shocked by the command that he actually sat. "Now," I said, unlatching my briefcase. "You asked me here to clarify terms. Let's clarify." I pulled out the 3 folders. I laid them out in a row. "You have a problem," I said. "A very big, very expensive problem. And contrary to what you think, I'm the only person in the world who can fix it. But fixing it is going to cost you." One of the external lawyers, a sharp-looking guy with a shaved head, spoke up. "Miss Vance, we are prepared to offer you a consulting agreement to rectify the signature discrepancy. We can offer you a standard rate of—" I held up a hand. "Stop. You think this is a negotiation for an hourly rate. It's not." I placed my hand on folder 1. "This isn't a consulting gig," I said softly. "This is a hostage negotiation, and I'm the one holding the gun." The room went dead silent. The air conditioning hummed. Brent stared at me, his mouth slightly open. He finally realized that the librarian had teeth. "Hostage negotiation?" Brent laughed, a jagged, nervous sound. "You're delusional. We have 50 lawyers on retainer. You have, what? A briefcase from 1995 and a grudge?" "I have the truth, Brent," I said, sliding folder 1 toward Marcus. "Open it." Marcus hesitated. He looked at the external lawyers. They nodded slightly. "Go ahead, see what she has." Marcus opened the navy blue folder. Inside was the single sheet of parchment-colored paper, a certified copy of the 2008 Master License Agreement, specifically page 42, clause 14. "B. Read the highlighted section, Marcus, out loud, for the class." Marcus adjusted his glasses. He cleared his throat. Clause 14, B. Sovereignty of IP. Any amendment, addendum, or modification that alters the territorial exclusivity of the licensed technology must be countersigned in wet ink by the founding licensor, Harris, and the chief licensing architect, Vance. Failure to adhere to this protocol renders said amendment void ab initio. I leaned forward. "Void ab initio. Do you know what that means, Brent?" "It means it's void from the beginning," Marcus whispered, his face going gray. "Exactly," I said. "It means the 2018 Global Expansion Amendment. The one you used to sign deals in Japan, Brazil, the UK, and now Germany never legally existed. You've been selling rights you don't have for 6 years. That's a technicality." Brent shouted, standing up again. "It's a clerical error. We can just sign it now, backdate it." "No, you can't," I said calmly. "Because old man Harris is dead. He can't sign it. And I'm not an employee. So I can't sign it as the chief licensing architect anymore. We'll argue intent in court," the shaved-head lawyer interjected smoothly. The intent of the parties was clear. The company operated as if the amendment was valid. A judge will uphold the doctrine of equitable estoppel. Maybe, I conceded, in 3 years, after discovery, after the depositions, after every single one of your international partners freezes their payments because they don't want to be accessory to IP fraud. Can the stock price survive a 3-year freeze on international revenue, Brent? Brent looked like he'd been punched in the gut. He knew the answer. The company burned cash. Without the international stream, they were insolvent in 6 months. "What do you want?" Brent asked. His voice was quiet now. The bluster was gone. "You want your job back, is that it? Fine, you're rehired. Come back. Sign the damn paper." "We'll pretend this never happened," I laughed. It was a genuine laugh. "My job? You think I want to come back to this cubicle farm and report to you?" "No, Brent, I don't want a job." I slid folder 2 across the table. "This is a timeline," I said. "It documents every single violation of Clause 14, B since 2018. Every contract signed, every dollar collected. It totals approximately $840 million in revenue collected under a void contract." Marcus flipped through the pages. His hands were shaking. I had been thorough. I had transaction IDs, dates, counterparties. "If I send this folder to the SEC," I said, "it's not just a contract dispute. It's securities fraud. You reported revenue to shareholders that was based on an invalid legal instrument. You attested to the validity of these contracts in your 10K filings, Brent. That's jail time. Federal. Brent sank into his chair. He looked at the lawyers. Is she right? The external lawyer sighed. It's problematic. If she goes whistleblower, the investigation alone destroys the market cap. Even if we win, we lose. So I said, clasping my hands, we've established that I have the power to turn this building into a crater. Now let's talk about how we avoid that. I reached for folder 3. This is the solution, I said. How much? Brent asked. Just say the number. 1 million? 2? Oh, Brent, I smiled. You're thinking too small. You're thinking like a manager. I need you to think like an owner, because that's what I am. I opened folder 3. I turned the document in folder 3 around so they could read it. It was my original 2008 employment agreement. Clause 9, I said. Read it. Marcus leaned in. He was sweating profusely now. He read silently for a moment, then his eyes bulged. He looked at me, then at Brent, then back at the paper. Jesus Christ, Marcus muttered. What? Brent snapped. What does it say? It says, Marcus stammered, that in the event of involuntary termination without cause, Helen retains a royalty interest in all licensing structures she personally authored, retroactive to the date of deployment. So? Brent waved a hand. A royalty, what is it? A few grand? It's defined as 1.5% of gross international licensing revenue, Marcus said, his voice trembling. 1.5%? Brent scoffed. That's peanuts. Fine. We'll pay you 1.5% of this month's sales. No, Brent, I corrected him gently. Retroactive to the date of deployment. That means 2018. You owe me 1.5% of every dollar this company has made outside of the US for the last 6 years. 1.5% of every dollar it makes in the future. The room went silent. The lawyers were doing mental math. $840 million in past revenue. 1.5% of $840 million. $12.6 million. Immediately, in cash, plus the future value. If the company hit its targets, that 1.5% was worth another $3.4 million a year. Forever. That's extortion, Brent whispered. No, that's a contract your father signed, a contract you triggered when you fired me without cause to save a few bucks on my salary. We'll fight it, Brent said, his face turning purple. We'll argue you were fired for cause, incompetence, insubordination. You can't, I pointed to the termination letter in folder 2, the one Kayla had handed me. You already signed this. Reason for separation, redundancy/role elimination. You put it in writing. Brent, you can't change the reason now just because the bill is higher than you expected. The external lawyer closed his laptop. He looked at Brent. She has you cold on the termination cause. If we try to change it now, it looks like retaliation. The Department of Labor would eat us alive before we even got to the contract dispute. $12 million, Brent muttered. I don't have $12 million in liquid cash for a severance payment. Then you better find it. I said, sell the yacht, sell the summer house in the Hamptons, or explain to the board why you need to dip into the emergency reserves because you didn't read my personnel file. This destroys me, Brent said, looking at me with pure hatred. If I pay this, the board will know. They'll fire me. Probably, I shrugged. But if you don't pay it, I send the email to Eurotech confirming the contract is void. Then you lose the $200 million deal. Then the SEC comes knocking. Then you don't just lose your job, Brent. You lose the company. You go to prison. I leaned back in my chair. So the choice is yours. You can be the CEO who paid a massive settlement to a brilliant architect he wrongfully terminated, an expensive mistake but survivable. Or you can be the CEO who committed fraud and destroyed his father's legacy. I checked my watch. I have a yoga class at 11. I need an answer before I leave. Brent looked at Marcus. Marcus nodded slowly. Pay her, Brent. It's the only way to seal the 14B breach. We can structure the settlement to include a waiver where she retroactively validates the signatures. We pay her to fix the mess. I hate you, Brent hissed at me. I know, I smiled. That's why I added a premium. A premium? Yes. The 1.5% is the contractual obligation. For me to sign the wet ink validation on the 2018 documents, to save your Eurotech deal, that requires a consulting fee. How much? Another $2 million, I said. Call it an asshole tax. The next hour was a blur of aggressive typing and hushed phone calls. Brent had stormed out to call the CFO, leaving me alone with the lawyers. This is where the real war happens. People think the war is the shouting match. It's not. The war is in the drafting of the settlement. External lawyer, his name was Sterling, apparently, slid a laptop toward me. We've drafted a preliminary settlement and release agreement, Sterling said. It structures the $14.6 million as a lump sum payment. In exchange, you release all claims, sign the retroactive validity documents for the 2008 and 2018 agreements, and agree to a standard NDA and non-compete. I pulled the laptop closer. I didn't just read it. I dissected it. Section 4, I said, pointing at the screen. Employee agrees to a global non-compete for a period of 5 years in the data licensing sector. Standard, Sterling said. We're paying you a fortune. We can't have you going to a competitor. Delete it, I said. Excuse me? Delete it. I'm not an employee anymore. I'm a consultant. And you're not paying me for my silence, you're paying me for my property, my royalties. I'm not signing a non-compete. If I want to go work for Eurotech next week, I will." Sterling frowned. Brent won't like that. Brent isn't here, and Brent doesn't have a choice. If I don't sign, the Eurotech deal dies today. Do you want to be the one to tell him the deal fell through because you got greedy on a non-compete? Sterling hesitated. He deleted the clause. Section 7, I continued. Non-disparagement. Employee agrees never to speak negatively about Streamline, its officers, or its operations. That stays, Sterling said firmly. We can't have you trashing the CEO on Twitter. I'll agree to non-disparagement regarding the company, I said, but I retain the right to speak factually about my tenure and the circumstances of my departure. If someone asks why I left, I'm not going to lie. We can language that, Marcus interjected, trying to play peacemaker. Mutual non-disparagement. We won't badmouth you either. Fine, I said, but I want a clause added. Section 8, what is it? The DeVito clause, I said, keeping a straight face. The what? I want a formal written apology from Brent Harris, signed in wet ink, acknowledging that my termination was an error in judgment and thanking me for my 16 years of service. And I want it framed. He'll never do that, Marcus said. It's humiliating. It's necessary, I said, for my file. I wasn't doing it for the file. I was doing it because I wanted to hang it in my bathroom. They argued. They called Brent. I heard shouting from the hallway. Eventually, Brent came back in. He looked like he had aged 10 years in one morning. Fine, he snapped. You get your money. You get your apology. Just sign the damn retroactive amendment so I can wire the funds to Germany. Money first, I said. Wire transfer. Fedwire. I want to see the confirmation number before my pen touches the paper. Can't wire $14 million in an hour. Brent yelled, You're a bankable tech company, I said. Call your rep at Chase. You can do it in 10 minutes if you want to. Brent glared at the CFO who had just walked in. Do it. We sat in silence for 12 minutes, the longest 12 minutes of Brent's life. I just stared at the abstract art on the wall. It was a painting of a chaotic storm. Fitting. My phone buzzed, a notification from my bank app. Deposit received, $14,600,000 and 0 cents. I checked the balance. It was real. I picked up the pen. It was a cheap Bic pen I'd pulled from my purse. I pulled the 2018 amendment, the fresh copy they had just printed, toward me. I signed my name, Helen Vance, Chief Licensing Architect. Then I signed the settlement agreement. Done, I said, capping the pen. I stood up. I closed my briefcase. I left the 3 folders on the table. They were empty now anyway. The bomb had been defused, but the gold was in my pocket. Pleasure doing business with you, Brent, I said. He didn't look up. He was staring at the table, probably calculating how he was going to explain the massive dip in cash reserves to the board next quarter. I walked out of the boardroom. I walked down the hall, but I had one last stop to make. I took the elevator down to the lobby. The adrenaline was starting to fade, replaced by a strange, heavy exhaustion. It was the crash after the high. But the number in my bank account, $14.6 million, was a hell of a cushion to land on. I walked past the reception desk. Sarah was still there. She looked terrified to make eye contact. It's okay, Sarah, I said. I'm leaving for good this time. Did it go okay? She whispered. It went fine, I said. Hey, Sarah. You know that plant in my old office? The peace lily? Yeah, don't water it, I said. Let it die. It hates this place anyway. I walked out the front doors. The air outside smelled sweet. It smelled like freedom. It smelled like early retirement. I got into my Volvo. I tossed the briefcase onto the passenger seat. I didn't drive home immediately. I drove to a small dive bar about 3 miles away. The Rusty Nut. It was where old man Harris used to take us after we signed a big deal in the early days. It was a dump. Peanut shells on the floor, neon signs that buzzed. It was 11:30 a.m. The place was empty except for the bartender, a guy named Al who looked like he'd been carved out of granite. Helen, Al blinked. Haven't seen you in years. Shouldn't you be at the glass tower? Not anymore, Al, I said, climbing onto a stool. I'm retired. Retired? You look too young to retire. I got a severance package, I said. A generous one. Well, congrats. What are you drinking? Champagne, I said, the cheap stuff. Cold. He popped a mini bottle of Corbel. I poured it into a flute. I sat there sipping the bubbles and looked at my phone. I had deleted my work email account from the app. I deleted the Slack app. I deleted the calendar. My phone felt lighter. I thought about Brent. He was probably spinning a narrative right now. He'd tell the board it was a strategic legal settlement to fortify IP positions. He'd use buzzwords. He'd survive, probably. Men like Brent usually fall upward, but he would never sleep soundly again. Every time he signed a contract, every time he saw a legal brief, he would flinch. He would wonder if there was another trapdoor, another clause, another Helen waiting in the weeds. And the best part? There was. I hadn't told him about the server migration protocols. In about 6 months, the system was scheduled to do an automated purge of redundant data logs. I had written the script years ago, unless someone manually overrode it. Well, let's just say the metadata for the entire 2019 to 2023 archive was going to vanish. I could have told him. I could have sold him the password for another million, but some things you do for love, and some things you do just for the chaos. I took a sip of champagne. To Brent, I toasted to the empty bar. May your pivots always be painful. I finished the drink. I left $100 bill on the counter. Keep the change, Al. I walked out into the sunlight. I had a yoga class to get to, and after that, well, I heard the Amalfi Coast is beautiful this time of year, and I finally had the time and the wet ink to go see it. My dignity hadn't just returned. It had been capitalized, vested, and paid out in full. We're all healed.